Preparing for an Investran interview. You've reached Candy Mentor, and this video is for you. We'll walk through 15 key questions you're likely to face. For each question, you'll see a sample answer followed by the key points to cover. Subscribe, like, and share, and drop a topic request in the comments. Question 1. What is Investran, and why is it used in private capital fund accounting? Investran is a private capital accounting and investor reporting platform used by fund administrators, GPs, and asset managers. I would describe it as the system of record for fund structures, investor commitments, capital activity, investment transactions, allocations, and statements. In an interview, I'd connect it to the close process. Transactions are loaded, allocations are run, NAV is reviewed, and investor reports are produced. The value is control, consistency, and scalable reporting across complex funds. While answering, focus on Investran as a private capital system of record. Its role in fund accounting, investor servicing, transaction processing, allocations, and reporting during monthly or quarterly closes. Question 2. Can you explain the typical data hierarchy in Investran? The hierarchy matters because everything in Investran rolls through it. I'd start with the legal entity or fund family, then funds, vehicles, investors, classes, commitments, deals, and bank or GL accounts. Static data drives later calculations, so setup errors create downstream allocation and reporting issues. I would emphasize checking effective dates, ownership percentages, investor attributes, and chart of account mapping before posting activity. Strong setup makes capital calls, distributions, NAV, and statements reliable. Make sure to cover fund families, legal entities, funds, investors, commitments, classes, deals, GL accounts, and why static data accuracy is critical before processing activity. Question 3. How would you set up a new private equity fund in Investran? When setting up a new fund, I begin with legal and operational terms, not just screen entry. I capture fund entity details, currency, fiscal year, commitment structure, investor classes, fee terms, allocation rules, bank accounts, and reporting requirements. Then I validate investor records, commitment amounts, closing dates, and equalization rules against the LPA and subscription documents. Before go live, I'd run test capital calls and allocations to confirm outputs match expected fund economics. In your answer, talk about reviewing the LPA, creating fund entities, adding investors and commitments, configuring fees, allocation rules, bank accounts, reporting templates, and testing setup outputs. Question 4. Walk me through how a capital call is processed in Investran. A capital call starts with the funding need, investment purchase, expenses, fees, or reserves. In Investran, I would enter or import the call transaction, apply the correct allocation basis, review investor-level amounts, and generate notices. The key is tying the call to commitments and ensuring defaults, excused investors, and late closings are handled properly. After cash is received, I'd reconcile bank receipts and update unfunded commitments, which feeds investor statements. Be sure to mention funding purpose, allocation basis, investor-level calculation, call notices, unfunded commitment updates, cash receipt reconciliation, default handling, and review controls before release. Question 5. How are distributions handled in Investran? Distributions must reflect both cash movement and investor economics. Investran can allocate proceeds across investors based on ownership, commitment percentages, investment level participation, or waterfall rules configured for the fund. I would verify the source of proceeds, classify return of capital versus gain, apply withholding if relevant, and review investor totals before notices go out. The accounting entries should reduce investment balances or recognize realized gain, then flow into NAV and partner capital reporting. While answering, focus on distribution source, allocation methods, return of capital, realized gain, withholding, notice generation, accounting entries, and how distributions affect NAV and partner capital. Question 6. What are allocation rules in Investran, and why are they important? Allocation rules tell Investran how fund-level activity becomes investor-level activity. For example, management fees might allocate by commitment, organizational expenses by commitment or ownership, and income by investor participation in a deal. I would discuss reviewing the LPA, configuring bases with effective dates, and testing edge cases such as side letters, fee waivers, excused investors, or transfers. Good allocation control prevents small setup issues from becoming material statement errors. Make sure to cover how allocation rules distribute activity across investors, the link to LPA economics, commitment versus ownership bases, effective dates, exceptions, and testing scenarios. Question 7. How would you use Investran during a quarterly NAV close? For a quarterly close, I'd use Investran to capture all capital activity, investment transactions, expenses, income, valuation updates, and allocations through the period end. Then I would run trial balances, investor capital reports, unfunded commitment reports, and statement packages. The review focuses on reasonableness, NAV roll forward, capital account movements, realized versus unrealized activity, and cash reconciliation. Once exceptions are cleared, reports can support investor statements, financials, and audit schedules. In your answer, talk about transaction posting, valuation updates, expense accruals, allocation runs, trial balance review, investor capital review, cash reconciliations, and final reporting packs. Question 8. How do you process an investor transfer or secondary sale in Investran? Investor transfers are sensitive because they affect ownership, commitments, capital accounts, and future allocations. In Investran, I would set the transfer effective date, transfer percentage or amount, buyer and seller records, and whether unfunded commitments move. Then I'd validate capital account balances, historical allocations, and future call or distribution percentages. Equalization may be needed if a new investor joins after prior activity. I always reconcile outputs to legal transfer documents and investor notices. Be sure to mention transfer effective date, seller and buyer records, commitment transfer, capital account impact, equalization, future allocation percentages, documentation, and reconciliation to legal agreements. Question 9. What information typically appears on an investor statement generated from Investran? Investor statements are the client-facing output, so I treat them as a final control point. Investran pulls capital calls, distributions, beginning capital, income, expenses, realized and unrealized gains, ending capital, and unfunded commitment from transaction and allocation data. I would explain that the statement is only as good as the underlying setup. Before release, I'd check totals to NAV, compare against prior periods, and confirm footnotes, currency, and investor-specific disclosures. While answering, focus on beginning capital, contributions, distributions, income, expenses, realized and unrealized gains, ending capital, unfunded commitment, NAV tie-out, and investor-specific disclosures. Question 10. How are investment-level transactions recorded and tracked in Investran? Investment transactions usually begin with a deal record and supporting accounting entries. In Investran, I would record purchases, follow-on investments, sales, income, expenses, valuations, and realized or unrealized gains at the investment level. The important point is whether the transaction affects cost, fair value, cash, income, or partner capital. I'd also make sure deal-level activity maps properly to GL accounts and investor allocation rules because it feeds both fund financials and investor reporting. Make sure to cover deal setup, purchases, follow-ons, sales, income, expenses, valuations, realized and unrealized gains, GL mapping, and downstream impact on fund and investor reporting. Question 11. How would you configure or review management fee calculations in Investran? Management fee calculations depend on the LPA, so I would never treat them as a generic percentage. In Investran, fees may be based on committed capital, invested capital, NAV, or step-down provisions after the investment period. I'd configure the basis, rate, effective dates, offsets, waivers, and investor exceptions. Then compare system output to an independent Excel recalculation. Once approved, the fee can be posted, allocated, called, and reported consistently. In your answer, talk about LPA terms, fee basis, rates, step-downs, waivers, offsets, investor exceptions, independent recalculation, posting, allocation, and reporting consistency. Question 12. How does Investran support waterfall and carried interest calculations? Waterfalls determine how proceeds are shared between LPs and the GP, so precision matters. I would describe common tiers: return of capital, preferred return, catch-up, and carried interest. In Investran, the waterfall may be configured in the system or supported by integrated models, depending on complexity. My interview answer would stress validating cumulative contributions, distributions, preferred return calculations, and clawback considerations. The final carry output must reconcile to partner capital and distribution notices. Be sure to mention waterfall tiers: return of capital, preferred return, catch-up, carried interest, system configuration versus external models, cumulative tracking, clawbacks, and reconciliation to notices. Question 13. If an Investran report does not tie to the trial balance, how would you troubleshoot it? If a report does not tie, I start with the lowest level data rather than changing the report. I'd compare transaction listings, allocation results, trial balance, investor capital, and cash activity for the same date range and entity. Common causes include wrong effective dates, missing allocations, incorrect investor class, unposted batches, mapping issues, or stale valuations. I document the break, fix root cause, rerun allocations if needed, and retain evidence for review. While answering, focus on systematic investigation. Compare source transactions, date ranges, entities, posting status, allocation runs, mappings, stale valuations, report parameters, and documenting root cause. Question 14. What controls would you perform during an Investran data migration? During migration, my goal is not just loading data. It is proving the new Investran environment matches books and investor records. I'd migrate static data, commitments, historical capital activity, investment cost, fair value, unfunded commitments, and opening capital balances. Then I would reconcile fund NAV, investor capital, commitment roll forwards, and deal balances to legacy reports. Parallel runs, exception logs, sign-offs, and audit trails are critical before relying on migrated data. Make sure to cover static data, historical transactions, opening balances, commitments, capital accounts, investment balances, NAV reconciliation, parallel runs, exception logs, sign-offs, and audit evidence. Question 15. What access controls and audit features are important in Investran? Investran supports controls through user roles, approval workflows, audit trails, posting controls, and segregation of duties. I would highlight that fund accounting data is sensitive, so users should only access entities and functions relevant to their role. For example, preparers may enter batches, reviewers approve, and administrators manage security separately. During audits or SOC reviews, evidence from system logs, change history, and report tie-outs helps demonstrate that transactions are complete, accurate, and authorized. In your answer, talk about role-based access, entity restrictions, approval workflows, audit trails, change logs, segregation of duties, posting controls, sensitive investor data, and audit support. If you are still with us, congratulations. You are much ahead of the rest and serious about preparing for your interview. We hope we were able to add value to your preparation and create some helpful content. Do not forget to like and share this video. Your small act can do great things for us.